So this is the full process of me building my 18th Gourd banjo. I made a lot of mistakes on this build, but in the end I learned a lot and it ended up being maybe my favorite, definitely my favorite looking and feeling banjo that I've made yet. And this one was built on commission and the client wanted a smaller gourd. So this is the gourd that I picked out for that. And yeah, you see me trying to cut at it with the Japanese saw. The last video I mentioned I needed one of these knives, and my dad, after watching that video, ordered me one and got it shipped to my house, so that was a nice surprise. And this thing is a huge help. It probably saved me like 20 or 30 minutes of just like messy hacking and sawing. So yeah, I got that top off pretty quickly. Yeah, and then I'm cleaning out the gourd with a chisel, which is not ideal. I was actually just talking to a guy who also makes a lot of gourd instruments, and he told me you should put a wire brush on the end of a drill and then go in and clean it out that way. So I'm gonna try that for the next one. We'll see. That'll probably get me a much better inside finish. Then yeah, I'm using the asphalt here to level out the top of the gourd. That usually works pretty well for me. It's not ideal because little chunks of asphalt and little rocks can get wedged in it, and then I have to pick those out and sand it all down. And so it'd be better if I had like a flat surface that I could do this on with like coarse sandpaper. But it works. It does the job. And then this gourd was a little thin in some spots, so I decided to fiberglass the whole thing. I'm trying to move away from fiberglassing the insides. I'm looking for alternative ways to strengthen them, but this one I think really benefited from the fiberglass. And then I'm grabbing this nice chunk of walnut for the neck. The client wanted a walnut neck with a cherry fingerboard. And then, yeah, I'm doing my kind of dangerous method of ripping this board. I don't want to give anything away for the next video, but I might have gotten a table saw for Christmas, so that might be the last time I have to do this sketchy thing with the circular saw, which is good. And now I'm trying to cut out the fingerboard wood out of this curly cherry, and because I don't have a table saw, I have kind of a makeshift rip fence on the bandsaw there, but it is not very accurate, and I ended up getting the blade pinched and it just wasn't working. It wasn't following my line. So I gave up and I tried to saw it by hand here, and I worked on that for a while, and then I finally, got it separated, but it was not level, it was not square at all, and I kind of at that point just gave up on that. But at the end of that last week, I was flying back home to New York for a wedding, and I went to my grandpa's shop, and he has the rest of that piece of cherry that I was using. So I figured I'd just use his table saw and planer and get it perfect. But then I saw this piece of cherry, which was a lot more interesting. It's kind of a burl cherry that one of his friends just dropped off and told him to use it in something, but he didn't have any ideas for what to use it for, so he said I could have it. And I cut that up into some fingerboard blanks and put them through the planer. And yeah, now I have like 5 of these fingerboard blanks that I'm really looking forward to using in a lot of builds, because this cherry burl is really incredible for fingerboards. It looks amazing. So yeah, here's the layout of it. This just kind of helps me visualize before I start cutting up the neck. And the client wanted mechanical tuners, and I haven't done that on a gourd yet, but I got these nice planetary tuners. I got these gold and black ones I thought would look really nice with the walnut and cherry. And what I'm doing here is I'm measuring out the thickness that the headstock will need to be, because these tuners are designed to fit a certain thickness of headstock. So if I made the headstock too thin, I would basically have to start from scratch. So I'm just being really careful and making sure I don't do that, and that kind of stressed me out through the whole process until I mounted these pegs. I was like, oh, I hope I didn't cut it too thin and blow the whole thing. Then once I had everything marked out, I started cutting the neck out on the bandsaw. And then this is a really simple headstock design that I came up with. I've used it, this is the second banjo I've used it on now, and I really like it. It's just a clean, simple design. I'm calling it the canoe paddle headstock because it looks kind of like the end of a canoe paddle, not the handle end, even though I'm using it like it's the handle in this clip, but you know what I mean. Then I just cut out the fingerboard wood. I like to use this joiner plane to kind of bring everything level and get everything all flat before I do the glue up. And that plane is square. I was checking there to make sure, because not all those old planes are perfectly square. Yeah, and then I check it with a straight edge, and I like to shine a light under it, just make sure there's no gaps underneath, because that can really screw you up later. If the pieces aren't dead flat when you glue them up, it can cause a lot of issues. Here's the glue up, and I like to over clamp. I probably use too many clamps, but I'm just paranoid, so I go a little crazy with it. Then the next day, take the clamps off, and I wanted to start shaping with this draw knife, because that's like the more professional way to do it, and it's a lot more elegant and quicker, I think. And that draw knife I got from my grandpa, who got it from his brother, who was homesteading in Alaska, so he used that on his house in Alaska. But yeah, I ended up just using the rasp because I still have to work on my draw knife skills, and I didn't want to damage this neck. Then once the neck is at its rough shape, I drill out the side dots for the fret markers. This is a cherry plug that I just drilled out. But then I realized I actually need walnut plugs. I wasn't paying attention, and I made cherry plugs. So I went back, cut out some walnut plugs, and started fitting them in. That's probably the main signature thing that I do, I would say, is matching the side dot wood with the neck wood, or vice versa. If the side dot is in the neck, then I'll match it to the fingerboard wood. I really like the way that looks. And now I'm trying to level it out as best I can again. I'm really trying to level that neck out. Someday I'm going to get just a flat block that I can use, that I can rub the neck onto. But for now, this works pretty well. But what I did with this one is towards the bottom, there's this thing that they do with guitars called fall away, where at the end of the fretboard, they'll let it kind of fall away, and you can see what I mean there. And I think it's more applicable on a fretted instrument. I don't know that it would really make much difference on a fretless instrument, but I wanted to try it because it's supposed to make playing up the neck a lot easier and cleaner. So I'm not sure if it made much of a difference, but I'm probably going to continue doing it because it doesn't hurt, and it probably helps a little bit. This burl wood had some little voids to fill, so I plugged all those up with some epoxy and let that dry, and now I'm chiseling it out and giving it another sand down, make sure it's all smooth. I'm really trying to be precise with drilling these holes for the tuners, but it's tough without a drill press. I did a pretty good job though, and I'm just slowly working up the bit size until it's big enough, and then I fit it in, and I was a little nervous that it wouldn't fit quite right, but it fit pretty well. The only thing is when I turn it around, you can see there's a pretty big gap there. So I needed to set the tuner into the wood a little bit. So I went to the store. I got a Forstner bit. They didn't have the size I thought I needed, but I got one down, and I just hoped it would work. And before I went ruining my headstock, I tried it out on this scrap piece of mahogany, and I tried to drill around a pre-existing hole to see how bad it would skate, and it skated pretty bad. So I realized pretty quickly that this was not going to work. And the bit I bought was much too big anyways, so that didn't work. But I guess I have a Forstner bit now, and I've been wanting to get a few of those for a while, so whatever. I ended up just doing it by hand with a chisel, and it looked pretty good in the end. In the future, I would take the correct size Forstner bit and pre-drill about 1/8 of an inch down before drilling the actual hole for the peg to go into, so now I know that. And I didn't film any of the neck fitting process, but here it is going into the gourd. And I really like this part of the process because you can get your first look at the banjo, what it'll look like in the end. I spent a while sanding down the gourd, and I'm putting a few coats of shellac on it. I like to put quite a few, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 coats of shellac on these gourds. Then after a really long sanding process that I didn't film any of, I'm putting this teak oil finish on the neck. Do a few coats of the teak oil, and then after that I'll put shellac on it. Once the oil's cured, I'll seal it with shellac, and doing it that way gives me kind of the best of both worlds because the oil makes the grain pop and brings out all the color and texture of the wood. And then putting the coats of shellac on it seals it up and gives that really nice smooth texture that feels really good in your hand while you're playing. I don't shellac the fingerboard itself, though. I leave that with just an oil finish. Then I always mark out where all my tacks are going to go and drill a little bit of the way into the gourd to help get the tacks started. And now it's time to put the skin on. The client wanted the coffee stained hide, so I brewed up some coffee in this bucket and left the hide in there for a little while, about 20 minutes. There's no like set time for how long you should soak it. It's just until you can like pull it out and pull at it, and it's kind of stretchy till it has some stretch to it. If you leave it in too long, it kind of soaks up too much water and it doesn't stretch quite so well. And if you don't leave it in long enough, it doesn't stretch as well. But there's kind of a sweet spot. So I like to keep checking it every like 5 or so minutes and until it feels right. And when I tack on the head, I just yank it as tight as I possibly can. Each tack, I just pull the skin back as hard as I can. Wherever I'm putting in the tack, I just pull it back as far and hard as I can and get the tack in there. And that seems to work pretty well for me. I've been really happy with the last several heads that I've done. And now here's where some disaster struck. I was wailing on the gourd with my hammer, which is really dumb and you should never do. And you can see here I just stopped working. I look pretty upset, taking out my earbuds. And that's because I completely broke the gourd by hitting it with the hammer too hard. So I'm taking out all the tacks, took the whole skin head off, and here it is, big crack right down the side of the gourd, and it's where the sound hole, that's the weakest point on the gourd, so that's where the sound hole is. So at first I was like, this is terrible, I need another gourd, I ruined it, but the more I thought about it, I thought, no, I can fix this. I can actually, it's not that bad of a fix. So first I got a bunch of glue in the crack and clamped it up and left that overnight. And then the next day I came and put this fiberglass on the back of it. I did a couple layers of fiberglass, and then I also put some epoxy on the outside. And here it is with the epoxy kind of dried. And then I took this opportunity while I had the skin off of it to level it out again, because I wasn't completely happy with how level the gourd was. And now I'm squirting on the hide glue, getting ready to reskin it again. I didn't know if I was going to be able to reuse the same skin. I decided to just try, to just go for it, because it already had the tack holes in it. But what actually ended up happening is I was able to stretch it out even further this second time. and it actually made for a tighter and a better head install. And that's something, whenever I'm looking at Jason Romero on it, he has a lot of Instagram posts where he talks about pre-stretching the skins before he mounts them. And I was always like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, but I don't know how I would do that. But I think by accident I ended up pre-stretching this head, so it actually worked out for the better. And I would say with all my fiberglass and epoxy and stuff, that cracked area of the gourd is probably significantly stronger now than it was before I cracked it. And the crack ended up not being very visible at all, so in the end it worked out pretty well. The head on this ended up being one of the tightest heads I've ever done, maybe the tightest. So I'm probably going to try to come up with a way to pre-stretch the heads now, because it really did make a difference. So now I'm getting that ebony nut fit in there, and I'm using this really fine kerf saw to cut the nut slots. I want to get proper nut slot files, but they make them for guitar, and like they're not really right for nylon banjo strings. They don't really have the right size. But yeah, that saw I'm using has the perfect kerf for the thinner strings, and then I use a thicker saw for the third and fourth strings. And then I like to just put a little dab of super glue to hold the nut in, but ideally the nut is a replaceable part of the banjo, so it could be knocked out of there if it ever needed to happen. This is the tailpiece. I'm doing a nice cherry tailpiece. Drilling it out for the dowel stick to go through, and then put some finish on that. And now I'm stringing it up for the first time. I'm putting the first string on it. So here's how it sounds, the first sounds to come out of this thing. Once I had all the strings on it, I was getting a little buzz on a few of the fret positions. So I leveled it all out, and I decided to just completely resurface the fingerboard, which is something that I have to do sometimes because I want to really make sure that it's dead flat and there's no buzz coming from any fret position on the neck. And then I drilled in the pip, the fifth string peg. I hear people call it the pip a lot. And it's always painful drilling into the nice finished fingerboard like this. And of course, I chipped out a big chunk while I was doing it. I was able, luckily, to find the chunk that came out, and it was all one piece, and I just CA glued that back in, and you could not even tell anymore. And once I sanded it down and refinished it, it's like it never happened. And the pip for this is just a little ebony plug. And what I like to do with my pips is I like to like file them down really, really short, just make them very, very low. Because a common problem with this style is that the fourth string will hit against the pip and cause a buzzing. So I really try to avoid that by just making it really short, and that works really well for me. And the pip, it actually does not need to be very tall at all. It just needs to be tall enough so that the fifth string can clear the fingerboard, which it does not take a lot. And the client wanted to put a strap on it, so I put this little brass holder on there. And all that's left is to make the bridge. I wanted the string spacing to be pretty wide on the bridge, but I ended up making it way too wide here. This is just ridiculous. So I made another bridge. Looks a lot better. The actual proper spacing. slightly wide spacing, but I find the wider spacing is really nice for claw hammer. It makes drop thumbing easier. It makes a lot of things easier. But here I am playing it up on the mountain. Right after filming this video, I shipped it off to the client. I was excited for her to get it, and she was very excited to play it. But then disaster struck. It arrived with the tailpiece broken in 3 pieces. And it's always been a fear of mine that something will go wrong with the shipping of one of these banjos. This is the first incident I've had, and it's definitely my fault because I made my shipping label and I got the UPS info, and they told me, oh, we can get it in by Friday as long as you drop it off by like noon or something today. So wanting to get it to the client as quickly as possible, I rushed the packing of it, and I had this brilliant idea to take a moving blanket and just wrap the whole banjo in the moving blanket, and I think I relied too heavy on that, and I didn't properly secure the bottom of the banjo. So I'm gonna definitely give special attention to the tailpiece area in the future when I ship these out. But immediately on finding out what happened, I started making a new tailpiece. And the way I make these is I drill out the center for the dowel stick, and then I gradually fit the tailpiece to the dowel stick through like a long process of putting it on, taking it off, removing some material, putting it back on. I couldn't do that this time because I didn't have the banjo, so I got the client to give me the measurements of the dowel stick, and then I made my own reproduction dowel stick to the same specifications. And I got that fitted on there perfectly. And then I didn't want to take any chances, so I got some steel threaded rods and drilled out the sides of this thing. And I embedded the steel rods below and above the hole for the dowel stick. So this thing is now a heavy steel reinforced tailpiece. So it would take quite a lot of force to damage this thing now. And I shipped it out with this other tailpiece too, just on the off chance that anything went wrong with the fit, so that either way they'd have something to work with, because that other tailpiece, that string just loops over the dowel stick. There's not really any way that it could fit wrong. But it ended up fitting great, and the banjo is up and running, thankfully. But yeah, fortunately the client was super understanding and patient with all of this procedure, and I know in the future to take much better care with my packaging. So here's a little bit more playing and beauty shots of the banjo, and thanks for watching.